The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment in Norfolk, Virginia, as Sarah Martinez stared at the rejection letter in her trembling hands. The words blurred together through her tears, but the message was crystal clear. Thank you for your interest in the Naval Special Warfare Program. Unfortunately, your application does not meet our current requirements. This was the 5th rejection letter she had received in 2 years. Each one felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. But this one was different. This one came from the Navy SEALs. Sarah had dreamed of serving in elite military units since she was 8 years old, watching her father clean his Marine dress blues on Sunday mornings. Captain Roberto Martinez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, coming home with stories that painted pictures of brotherhood, honor, and sacrifice that made Sarah's heart race with excitement rather than fear. Mija, her father had said when she first mentioned her dream at 12 years old, "The military is no place for a girl like you. You're too small, too soft. Find something else to dream about." Those words had echoed in her mind for years, growing louder with each rejection, each dismissive comment from recruiters, each time someone told her she was chasing an impossible dream. But Sarah was nothing if not stubborn. At 22, she stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed barely 120 pounds. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her brown eyes held a fire that most people mistook for anger. The truth was, it wasn't anger at all. It was determination mixed with desperation, a burning need to prove that she belonged somewhere she had never been welcome. The apartment she shared with her roommate Lisa was sparse, containing only the essentials. Sarah spent every penny she earned working at the local gym on training equipment, supplements, and preparation courses for military entrance exams. Her side of the room looked like a military surplus store had exploded, with tactical gear, training manuals, and motivational posters covering every surface. "Sarah, maybe it's time to consider other options," Lisa said gently, watching her friend crumple the rejection letter and toss it into an already overflowing trash can. "The FBI is recruiting women. The CIA has amazing opportunities. You don't have to put yourself through this torture." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and walked to the mirror hanging on the wall. She studied her reflection, seeing not the warrior she dreamed of becoming, but a small woman who looked younger than her years, whose face was marked by exhaustion and disappointment. "My grandfather fought in World War II," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears. "My father served in the Marines. My uncle died in Vietnam. This family has always produced warriors. I won't be the generation that breaks that tradition because I'm a woman." Lisa sighed, knowing better than to argue when Sarah got that look in her eyes. They had been friends since college, and she had watched Sarah transform herself from a pretty, popular psychology major into something harder, more focused, more driven than anyone she had ever known. The transformation hadn't been easy or pretty. Sarah had started training seriously during her junior year of college, after a military recruiter had laughed at her when she asked about special operations opportunities for women. She began waking up at 4 in the morning to run, regardless of weather. She lifted weights until her hands bled and calloused over. She practiced martial arts, learned weapons handling, and studied military tactics with the intensity of someone preparing for war. Her grades suffered. Her social life disappeared. Her relationship with David, her boyfriend of 2 years, crumbled when he told her she was becoming obsessed and unfeminine. The comment had stung more than any rejection letter, because part of her worried he might be right. But Sarah pressed on. She enlisted in the Navy immediately after graduation, scoring in the top percentile on every test they gave her. Her drill instructors were surprised by her performance, often forgetting she was there until she outran, outshot, or outperformed men twice her size. She earned respect through sheer force of will and an absolute refusal to quit, no matter how much pain she was in. After completing basic training with honors, Sarah applied for every specialized program the Navy offered. She was accepted into several, including intelligence and communications programs that would have guaranteed her a successful military career. But her heart was set on only one thing: the Navy SEALs. The problem was that women weren't allowed in the SEALs. The policy had been in place for decades, based on physical standards and unit cohesion concerns that Sarah knew were really just polite ways of saying women weren't tough enough. She had watched the military slowly open combat roles to women over the years, but the most elite special operations units remained closed. That didn't stop her from trying. Sarah applied anyway, using every loophole, every connection, every argument she could think of. She wrote letters to congressmen, petitioned military officials, and even started a blog documenting her training in hopes of generating public support. The blog, titled Breaking Barriers, attracted a small but dedicated following of people who believed in her mission. Most of the responses she received were supportive, but the hate mail was brutal. Anonymous commenters called her everything from attention seeker to much worse things that questioned her motivations, her abilities, and her worth as a human being. The criticism from her own family was almost harder to bear. "You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah," her father had said during their last phone conversation. "And you're embarrassing our family." Real Marines know when to accept reality. Those words had cut deeper than any stranger's insult. But Sarah had supporters too. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, had become something of a mentor. He was a former SEAL himself, medically retired after an injury in Syria, and he saw something in Sarah that reminded him of the best operators he had served with. "It's not about size or gender," he told her one evening after she had completed a particularly brutal training session. "It's about heart. It's about the ability to push through when your body is screaming at you to quit. You've got that, Martinez. The question is whether the Navy is ready for you." Morrison had connections throughout the special operations community, and he began making quiet inquiries about opportunities for Sarah. Most doors remained closed, but a few cracks began to appear. There were rumors of a pilot program, whispers of policy changes, hints that the political winds might be shifting. Then came the breakthrough Sarah had been waiting for. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, Morrison called Sarah into his office with an expression she couldn't read. Her heart pounded as she sat across from his desk, wondering if this was another rejection or something else entirely. "I just got off the phone with someone very interesting," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. "It seems your blog has been getting attention in some very high places. There's a new initiative coming down from Washington. They're looking for exceptional candidates to test new inclusion protocols." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of initiative?" "They're calling it the Special Operations Integration Assessment. It's a pilot program designed to evaluate the potential for expanded inclusion in elite units. If you're selected, you would go through modified SEAL training as part of a comprehensive study." The words hit Sarah like lightning. This was it. This was the chance she had been fighting for, training for, dreaming about for years. "What do I need to do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Morrison smiled for the first time since she had known him. "You need to be better than perfect. This isn't just about you, Sarah. If you succeed, you could open doors for thousands of women who will come after you. If you fail, those doors might stay closed for another generation." The weight of that responsibility should have terrified her, but instead it felt like fuel being poured on an already burning fire. Sarah had been carrying the dreams of other women whether she wanted to or not. Now it was official. "When do I start?" she asked. "Next month." "But, Sarah," Morrison's expression grew serious. "This won't be like anything you've experienced. They're going to push you harder than any candidate has ever been pushed. Some people in the program want you to succeed, but others are going to do everything in their power to make you quit. They'll be watching for any sign of weakness, any excuse to say this experiment failed." Sarah stood up, feeling taller than she had in months despite her small stature. "Let them watch. Let them push. I've been preparing for this my entire life." That night, Sarah called her father for the first time in 3 months. When he answered, she could hear the surprise in his voice. "Papa, I got accepted," she said simply. There was a long pause. "Accepted where?" "The SEAL program. I'm going to be the first woman to go through their training." Another pause, longer this time. When her father spoke again, his voice was different. Quieter. "Mija, that's impossible. Women can't. They can now. I start next month." Roberto Martinez had never been speechless in his life, but he was now. His little girl, the daughter he had tried to protect from the harsh realities of military life, was about to attempt something that would challenge the strongest men in the world. "Are you sure about this?" he finally asked. Sarah looked around her apartment, at the rejection letters overflowing from the trash can, at the training equipment that had become extensions of her own body, at the mirror that reflected back a woman who had transformed herself through sheer force of will. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. When she hung up the phone, Sarah Martinez began the final phase of preparation for the most important challenge of her life. She had 3 weeks to get ready for hell, and she intended to use every minute. The little girl who had once been called too small, too soft, too worthless for the military was about to prove that sometimes the biggest hearts come in the smallest packages. She just didn't know yet that her journey would eventually lead to a phone call from the highest office in the land, or that her story would change the course of military history forever. But first, she had to survive what was coming next. Outside her window, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean and preparing the world for whatever dawn would bring. Sarah Martinez stood at that window, watching the water cascade down the glass, and smiled for the first time in months. Tomorrow, everything would change. She was ready. The bus ride to Naval Special Warfare Group 1 in Coronado, California felt like traveling to another planet. Sarah pressed her face against the window, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, across thousands of miles of water, were the battlefields where her father had earned his scars and her uncle had given his life. Now it was her turn. The basic underwater demolition/SEAL, Bud/S compound looked exactly like she had imagined it from countless hours of research. Low, weathered buildings scattered across sand that seemed to hold the echoes of every man who had ever attempted to earn the trident. The famous bell that candidates rang when they quit stood in the center of the grinder, polished to a bright shine by the hands of those who had given up their dreams. Sarah had sworn she would never touch that bell. She was the only woman in Class 347, a fact that became obvious the moment she stepped off the bus. 53 men turned to stare at her, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile to openly dismissive. The silence stretched until one of them, a massive guy from Texas named Rodriguez, started to laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They really are lowering the standards." Several other candidates chuckled, but Sarah kept her face neutral. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. What she hadn't prepared for was how small and vulnerable it would make her feel to be surrounded by so much skepticism and testosterone. The head instructor, Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Stone, appeared as if summoned by the tension in the air. He was everything Sarah had imagined a SEAL instructor would be: tall, lean, weathered by sun and salt water, with eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. When he looked at Sarah, his expression was unreadable. "Listen up, tadpoles," Stone barked, his voice carrying across the compound with the authority of someone who had spent 20 years turning boys into warriors. "I don't give a damn what you look like, where you come from, or what's between your legs. There's only 2 types of people here: those who will quit, and those who will earn the trident. Most of you will be in the first group." His eyes lingered on Sarah for just a moment longer than necessary. "Some of you are here because of politics. Some of you are here because you think you're special. Let me make something clear. The ocean doesn't care about politics, and the enemy doesn't care about your feelings. The only thing that matters here is whether you can do the job." The first week was called indoctrination, but Sarah quickly learned it was really about breaking down everything you thought you knew about your own limits. They ran everywhere they went, often carrying boats over their heads or dragging heavy equipment through sand that seemed designed to swallow your feet and slow you down. Sarah had always been fast, but carrying a 200-pound boat with 6 other people was different than running alone. She struggled to keep up during the longer runs, her shorter stride putting her at a disadvantage that became more pronounced with each passing mile. By the end of the first day, her legs felt like they were made of concrete, and she still had to complete evening PT. "You okay, Martinez?" asked Danny Walsh, a former college football player from Ohio who had been surprisingly supportive. Unlike some of the others, Danny seemed genuinely interested in seeing Sarah succeed. "I'm fine," she lied, stretching muscles that screamed in protest. "Just getting warmed up." The truth was that Sarah was in the best shape of her life, but she was discovering that being in great shape for a woman and being in great shape for SEAL training were 2 very different things. The men around her weren't just bigger and stronger. Many of them had been preparing for this specific challenge for years, with access to training facilities and programs that had been closed to her. But Sarah had something else, an absolutely unshakable determination to prove that she belonged here. The real test came during the second week, when they began surf torture. The candidates were ordered to link arms and sit in the freezing Pacific Ocean while waves crashed over their heads for what felt like hours. The instructors called it surf appreciation, but everyone knew it was designed to break your mind before your body gave out. The water temperature was 58 degrees. Within minutes, Sarah's teeth were chattering so hard she thought they might crack. Her muscles began to seize up, and she lost feeling in her hands and feet. Around her, she could hear other candidates moaning and whimpering as hypothermia began to set in. "Martinez," Stone's voice cut through the sound of crashing waves. "How you doing out there?" "Huya, Master Chief," Sarah shouted back, though her voice came out as barely more than a croak. "What was that? I can't hear you." "Huya, Master Chief." Stone nodded approvingly and moved on to torture someone else. Sarah focused on her breathing. Using meditation techniques, she had learned to separate her mind from what her body was experiencing. She visualized herself succeeding, imagining the moment when she would finally earn the trident and prove that she belonged here. That visualization kept her going when Rodriguez, sitting next to her, leaned over and whispered, "Just quit, sweetheart. No one will think less of you for admitting you're not cut out for this." Sarah turned to look at him, her lips blue with cold, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. "I'll be here long after you ring that bell," she said quietly. Rodriguez laughed, but there was less certainty in it than before. As the weeks progressed, the training became more intense. They learned small boat operations, diving, weapons handling, and combat tactics. Each day began before dawn with a run on the beach, followed by calisthenics that pushed every muscle group to failure. Then, hours of instruction punctuated by more physical challenges. Sarah excelled in some areas and struggled in others. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in the class, and her performance in underwater operations surprised even the instructors. Years of swimming had given her a comfort in the water that many of the bigger, stronger candidates lacked. But she continued to struggle with some of the strength-based challenges. The obstacle course, with its rope climbs and cargo net traversals, consistently put her near the bottom of the class times. Each failure was noted, documented, and added to a growing file that would ultimately determine whether she continued in the program. The instructors maintained professional distance, but Sarah could feel their eyes on her constantly. Every stumble was analyzed, every success questioned. She knew that she was being held to a different standard than the men around her, and that knowledge was both motivating and exhausting. The first major quit happened during week 4. Jimmy Patterson, a former Army Ranger who had seemed like a sure thing to graduate, rang the bell during a particularly brutal PT session. He had been struggling with a shoulder injury for days, and finally reached the point where the pain overwhelmed his determination to continue. As Patterson walked away from the compound, his head hanging in defeat, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean water. If someone like Patterson could quit, anyone could quit. The bell that had seemed like a distant threat suddenly felt much more real and present. "Don't look at him," Walsh whispered as they continued their exercise. "Keep your eyes forward." But Sarah couldn't help herself. She watched Patterson disappear around a corner, carrying his dreams in a sea bag over his shoulder, and wondered how many more would follow him. The answer came during Hell Week. Hell Week was legendary among special operations candidates. 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of 4 hours of sleep. It was designed to push candidates far beyond their breaking point and identify those with the mental toughness to continue when their bodies had nothing left to give. Sarah had been preparing for Hell Week since she first learned about the SEALs, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. It began on a Sunday night with Breakout, a frenzied burst of activity designed to shock candidates into the right mindset. Instructors wearing camouflage paint and carrying weapons stormed through the barracks, shouting orders and creating chaos. Candidates were ordered to hit the surf, then perform calisthenics on the beach, then hit the surf again. Within the first hour, Sarah was soaking wet, covered in sand, and exhausted. She had 131 hours to go. The next 5 days blurred together in a haze of pain, exhaustion, and hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. They ran for miles while carrying boats, crawled through obstacle courses in the mud, performed endless sets of push-ups and sit-ups, and completed mission scenarios that seemed designed by someone with a sadistic imagination. Sarah discovered muscles she didn't know she had, then felt them tear and rebuild themselves overnight. Her hands developed blisters that popped and reformed daily. She learned to sleep while running, a skill that seemed impossible until her body demanded it. The hallucinations started on Tuesday night. Sarah began seeing her father standing on the beach, watching her with an expression of disappointment that cut deeper than any physical pain. She saw her uncle, the one who had died in Vietnam, shaking his head sadly as she struggled through another evolution. "He's not really there," Walsh whispered during one of their brief rest periods. The mind plays tricks when you're this tired. But the hallucinations felt real enough to make Sarah question everything she was doing. Was she really strong enough for this? Was she proving something important, or just being stubborn? Were the voices in her head right when they told her to quit while she still had her dignity? By Wednesday night, 11 more candidates had rung the bell. The sound of that brass bell clanging in the darkness had become the soundtrack to Hell Week, a constant reminder that relief was only a few steps away. "Just ring the bell, Martinez," Rodriguez gasped during a particularly brutal boat evolution. "This is insane. No one expects you to make it through this." Sarah looked at him through eyes swollen with fatigue and salt water. Rodriguez had been one of the strongest candidates at the beginning of training, but Hell Week was breaking him down just like everyone else. His face was gaunt, his hands were bleeding, and his voice had taken on the desperate quality of someone looking for permission to give up. "Then, don't expect it," Sarah replied. "But I'm not quitting." Thursday brought a new level of suffering that Sarah hadn't known was possible. They were ordered to perform around-the-world boat carries, which involved lifting their 200-pound inflatable boat over their heads and carrying it for miles along the beach. Sarah's boat crew had been reduced to 5 people after 2 quit earlier in the week, making each person's load even heavier. Halfway through the evolution, Sarah felt something pop in her shoulder. The pain was immediate and intense, shooting down her arm and making her vision blur. She almost dropped her corner of the boat, which would have meant failure for the entire crew. "Martinez." Stone appeared beside her, somehow keeping pace while she stumbled through the sand. "You hurt?" "No, Master Chief," Sarah lied through gritted teeth. "You sure about that?" "Yeah, Master Chief." Stone studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Outstanding. Carry on." Sarah completed the evolution with what she later learned was a partially separated shoulder. She told no one about the injury, knowing that any sign of physical weakness would be used as justification to remove her from training. By Friday morning, the class had been reduced from 54 candidates to 28. The quitters had been replaced by a haunted quiet that hung over the survivors like fog. Everyone who remained understood that they had crossed some invisible line, that they had proven something to themselves that could never be taken away. Hell Week ended at sunset on Friday, with the traditional ceremony where candidates were presented with brown t-shirts signifying their survival. Sarah stood in formation, swaying slightly from exhaustion, as Master Chief Stone addressed the survivors. "You 28 have proven that you have the basic mental toughness required to be SEALs," he said. "But this was just the beginning. The real training starts now." As Sarah accepted her brown t-shirt, Stone looked directly into her eyes. "Not bad, Martinez. Not bad at all." It was the closest thing to praise she had received since arriving at BUD/S, and it meant more to her than any medal or commendation ever could. That night, for the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to believe that she might actually make it through the program. She had survived Hell Week, something that would have been impossible just a few months earlier. She was becoming something she had never been before. She was becoming a warrior. But the hardest test was still ahead of her, and she had no idea that her journey was about to attract attention from the highest levels of government, or that a simple phone call would change everything she thought she knew about her mission. As she fell asleep in her rack, listening to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, Sarah Martinez dreamed of the trident she was fighting to earn, and of proving once, and for all, that some barriers were meant to be broken. The second phase of BUD/S training brought new challenges that tested Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. Combat diving and underwater operations required not just physical strength, but absolute trust in equipment and procedures that could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah found herself thriving in the underwater environment. While many of her classmates struggled with the claustrophobic feeling of being submerged for extended periods, she moved through the water with a grace that surprised even the instructors. Years of competitive swimming had given her lung capacity and water confidence that proved invaluable during the most stressful evolutions. The pool competency test was legendary among SEAL candidates. Instructors would attack students underwater, removing their masks, tangling their air hoses, and creating life-threatening situations that candidates had to resolve while remaining calm enough to follow proper procedures. Panic meant failure, and failure meant removal from the program. When Sarah's turn came, she descended to the bottom of the pool wearing full scuba gear, trying to control her breathing and heart rate. She knew the instructors were watching, waiting for the right moment to turn her world upside down. The attack came without warning. Instructor Petty Officer First Class Torres appeared behind her like a shark, yanking her mask off her face and spinning her regulator around so she couldn't find it. In the same motion, he tangled her air hose and began pushing her toward the bottom of the pool. For a split second, Sarah felt the familiar surge of panic that had ended many military careers. The primitive part of her brain screamed at her to fight, to surface, to breathe. But she forced herself to remain calm, methodically working through the procedures she had drilled hundreds of times. First, she secured her air supply, feeling around until she found her regulator and cleared it of water. Then, she dealt with her mask, flooding and clearing it while Torres continued to harass her. Finally, she untangled her air hose and swam calmly to the surface, following all safety protocols despite the chaos around her. When she broke the surface, Torres was grinning. "Outstanding, Martinez. That's how it's done." The compliment meant everything to Sarah, validation that she wasn't just surviving the program, but actually excelling in areas that mattered. She was beginning to understand that her smaller size, which had been such a disadvantage in strength-based evolutions, was actually an asset underwater. She moved more efficiently, used less air, and could navigate tight spaces that gave bigger candidates trouble. Word of her performance began to spread beyond the immediate training cadre. Sarah noticed unfamiliar officers observing her training sessions, taking notes, and speaking in hushed conversations with her instructors. She tried to ignore the extra attention, but it was hard to miss the feeling that she was being evaluated by people far above her pay grade. The third phase of BUD/S brought land warfare training, and with it, Sarah's greatest challenge yet. The candidates were transported to San Clemente Island, where they would spend weeks learning small unit tactics, weapons employment, and demolitions. It was here that the skills learned in the previous phases would come together to create complete special operations warriors. Sarah excelled in marksmanship and tactical planning, but continued to struggle with some of the physical demands. Carrying heavy packs over long distances remained a challenge, and she often found herself at the back of the formation during road marches. Each time she fell behind, she could see the instructors making notes, adding to the documentation that would ultimately determine her fate. "You're doing good, Martinez," Walsh said during one particularly brutal training exercise. They had been awake for 36 hours, conducting simulated raids and gathering intelligence on mock enemy positions. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah appreciated the support, but she could see the exhaustion in Walsh's eyes. The training was taking its toll on everyone, and several more candidates had already been dropped for various reasons. The class that had started with 54 candidates was now down to 18. "Thanks, Danny. You too." "I'm serious," Walsh continued. "What you're doing here, it matters. My little sister wants to be a pilot. She keeps asking me about you, about whether you're going to make it. You're already changing things, whether you graduate or not." The weight of that responsibility had grown heavier with each passing week. Sarah knew that her success or failure would be used to judge the potential of every woman who came after her. It was motivation and burden combined, pushing her forward while adding pressure that none of her male classmates had to carry. The demolitions training was where Sarah truly began to shine. The precise, methodical nature of explosives work suited her analytical mind perfectly. She learned to calculate charges, place explosives for maximum effect, and plan complex demolition operations with a skill that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. Martinez has a real gift for this. She overheard Instructor Chief Williams telling another cadre member. She thinks 3 steps ahead, considers all the variables. That's exactly what we want in operators who handle explosives. The validation felt incredible, but Sarah tried not to let it go to her head. She had learned that praise from instructors was rare and should be treasured, but never taken as a guarantee of success. Too many good candidates had been dropped for seemingly minor infractions or failures. As the training progressed, Sarah noticed that the media attention around her participation was growing. Articles appeared in military publications and mainstream newspapers, documenting her progress and speculating about the implications of her potential success. Some of the coverage was supportive, but much of it focused on the controversy surrounding her presence in the program. First female SEAL candidate struggles with physical standards, read one headline that particularly stung. The article focused entirely on her difficulties with strength-based evolutions, ignoring her successes in other areas. The comments section was even worse, filled with people questioning not just her abilities but her motivations and character. Sarah learned to avoid reading about herself online, but it was impossible to completely escape the coverage. The other candidates began treating her differently, some with increased respect and others with resentment over the attention she was receiving. She felt increasingly isolated, caught between those who wanted her to succeed for political reasons and those who wanted her to fail to prove their pre-existing beliefs. The situation came to a head during the final field training exercise. The candidates were divided into teams and given a complex mission that required them to infiltrate an enemy compound, gather intelligence, and extract without being detected. It was the culmination of everything they had learned, and performance would heavily influence final graduation decisions. Sarah was assigned to a team with Rodriguez, who had become increasingly hostile as the training progressed, and 2 other candidates who seemed to view her as a liability. When they were planning their approach to the target, Rodriguez made his feelings clear. "Look, Martinez, no offense, but you're going to slow us down. Why don't you hang back and provide security while we handle the actual infiltration?" It was exactly the kind of situation Sarah had been dreading. Being marginalized during the most important exercise of training could provide justification for her removal from the program, regardless of her individual capabilities. "I can handle my part of the mission," she said firmly. "I've been training just as hard as everyone else." "Yeah, but training and the real thing are different. This isn't about politics or making a point. This is about completing the mission." Sarah looked around at her teammates, seeing doubt and skepticism in their faces. She realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but potentially the future of every woman who might follow in her footsteps. "Give me the hardest part," she said quietly. "Whatever you think is most likely to fail, assign it to me. If I can't handle it, I'll accept the consequences." The team exchanged glances, surprised by her response. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, you get the compound infiltration. Solo, we'll provide overwatch and extraction support, but you're on your own in there." It was exactly what Sarah had hoped for, a chance to prove herself without anyone else to blame if things went wrong. The exercise began at midnight, with teams inserting from the ocean and making their way inland to their targets. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached the mock enemy compound, knowing that instructors were watching her every move through night vision equipment and evaluating her performance in real time. The compound was surrounded by motion sensors and guard towers manned by instructors playing enemy forces. Sarah would have to use everything she had learned about stealth, tactics, and fieldcraft to reach her objective undetected. She moved like a ghost through the darkness, using shadows and terrain features to mask her approach. Her smaller size, which had been such a disadvantage during strength evolutions, now worked in her favor as she squeezed through spaces and moved positions that would have been impossible for larger candidates. The infiltration took 3 hours of careful movement, but Sarah successfully reached the target building and gathered the required intelligence without triggering any alarms. Her extraction was equally flawless, demonstrating patience and tactical awareness that impressed even the most critical observers. When the exercise was complete and teams were conducting after-action reviews, the lead instructor made an announcement that surprised everyone. Outstanding performance by Team 3 on the compound infiltration. Martinez, that was textbook special operations work. Aggressive when needed, patient when required, and flawlessly executed. The praise felt different this time, more meaningful because it was based purely on performance rather than politics or social concerns. Sarah had proven, to herself and everyone watching, that she belonged here based on her abilities as an operator. Rodriguez approached her after the debrief, his expression unreadable. Sarah braced herself for another confrontation, but instead he extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "That was impressive work in there." The handshake felt like more than just professional respect. It felt like acceptance, the kind that had to be earned rather than demanded. As training entered its final weeks, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. She was no longer just surviving the program. She was thriving in it. Her scores in tactical operations and specialized skills were among the highest in the class, and even her physical fitness scores had improved to acceptable levels. But success brought new pressures and unexpected challenges. The media attention had grown beyond anything Sarah had anticipated. News crews waited outside the base gates, hoping for interviews or even just photographs. Political figures began commenting on her progress, using her story to support their own agendas. Military officials from Washington made increasingly frequent visits to observe her training. "This is getting out of hand," Master Chief Stone told her during a private meeting. "You've got senators calling the base commander, reporters trying to bribe junior enlisted for information, and enough brass showing up to training that we're starting to look like a parade ground instead of a special operations school." Sarah felt the weight of expectations and attention pressing down on her like a physical force. "What do you want me to do, Master Chief? I can't control what other people say or do." "No, but you can control how you respond to it. Stay focused on why you're here. Don't let the politics and media circus distract you from the mission." It was good advice, but increasingly difficult to follow. Sarah could feel herself becoming a symbol rather than just a candidate, and she wasn't sure how to handle the responsibility that came with that role. The final challenge came in a form she had never expected. 3 weeks before graduation, Sarah was called to report to the base commander's office. She had never spoken to anyone above the rank of lieutenant commander, so the summons felt ominous. She spent the entire walk across base trying to figure out what she had done wrong. Captain Harrison was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. When Sarah reported to his office, she found him reviewing what looked like a very thick file. "At ease, Martinez. Have a seat." Sarah sat down carefully, still trying to read the situation. "I have some news that's going to change your training schedule," Captain Harrison said. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a phone call. I can't tell you who it's from, but I can tell you that it's going to be the most important conversation of your military career." The cryptic message left Sarah with more questions than answers, but she knew better than to press for details. "Yes, sir. Is there anything I need to prepare?" Captain Harrison smiled. "Just be yourself, Martinez. Be the woman who has impressed every instructor in this program, who has overcome every challenge we've thrown at you, and who has proven that barriers exist to be broken." As Sarah walked back to the barracks, she wondered what kind of phone call could be important enough to interrupt SEAL training. She had no idea that her story had reached the very highest levels of government, or that someone with the power to change military policy forever had been following her progress with keen interest. That night, as she lay in her rack listening to the familiar sound of waves against the shore, Sarah Martinez had no idea that tomorrow would bring a conversation that would transform her from a determined candidate into a symbol of change that would resonate far beyond the military. The phone would ring at exactly 0800 hours, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah stood at attention in Captain Harrison's office at exactly 0800 hours, her heart beating so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Master Chief Stone was there, along with 2 officers she didn't recognize wearing uniforms that indicated they were from Washington. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The phone on Harrison's desk had been silent for exactly 3 minutes, which felt like 3 hours to Sarah. Then it rang. Captain Harrison picked up on the first ring. Captain Harrison speaking. He listened for a moment. Then, his expression changed completely. Yes, sir. She's right here. Yes, sir. I understand completely. He held the phone out to Sarah with a look of amazement on his face. Petty Officer Martinez, you have a phone call. From the President of the United States. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For a moment, she thought she might faint, but military training kept her upright and moving. She took the phone with hands that trembled slightly despite her best efforts to control them. This is Petty Officer Martinez, sir. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable, even though Sarah had only heard it on television and radio. President Williams spoke with the same calm authority that had helped him win the election 6 months earlier. Petty Officer Martinez, this is President Williams. I hope you don't mind the interruption to your training, but I wanted to speak with you personally about what you're accomplishing out there. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process the surreal situation of standing in a military office while talking to the most powerful person in the world. It's an honor to speak with you, sir. Thank you for calling. The honor is mine, Petty Officer. I've been following your progress through BUD/S training, and I want you to know that your achievements have not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of government. What you're doing is important, not just for the military, but for the entire country. The President's words carried a weight that made Sarah's knees weak. She had known that her training was being watched, but she hadn't realized the attention extended all the way to the Oval Office. Sir, I'm just trying to earn the right to serve with the SEALs. I hope my performance has been satisfactory. President Williams chuckled, a sound that somehow made the conversation feel more human despite its extraordinary nature. Satisfactory? Petty Officer, your instructors tell me you're performing at the top of your class in multiple areas. Your tactical planning scores are exceptional, your marksmanship is outstanding, and your leadership during field exercises has been exemplary. Sarah felt a surge of pride that she quickly tried to suppress. Military bearing demanded humility, even when talking to the President. Thank you, sir. I've had excellent instructors and training. That's exactly the attitude I was hoping to hear. Now, I want to talk to you about something that goes beyond your individual training. Are you familiar with the broader implications of what you're accomplishing? Sarah considered the question carefully. Sir, I understand that my participation in this program is part of a pilot study regarding expanded inclusion in special operations units. I know that other women will be affected by the results. That's correct, but it goes deeper than that. Petty Officer Martinez, you are potentially making history. If you graduate from BUD/S, you will become the first woman ever to earn the SEAL Trident. That achievement will open doors that have been closed for generations, and it will send a message to young women across the country about what's possible when determination meets opportunity. The weight of that responsibility had been growing heavier throughout training, but hearing it articulated by the President made it feel almost overwhelming. Sir, I'm honored to be part of this program, but I hope my success or failure will be judged on my individual performance rather than what it means for other people. That's exactly the right answer, President Williams said, and Sarah could hear the approval in his voice. You're approaching this as a warrior first, which is precisely what we need. But I want you to understand that your success will have implications far beyond the military. Congress is watching this program closely. Military leaders around the world are paying attention, and young women who dream of serving their country in ways that have never been available to them are looking to you as proof that those dreams are achievable. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of what the President was telling her. Sir, what do you need from me? I need you to finish what you started. I need you to graduate from BUD/S and prove that inclusion in special operations can be based on merit rather than gender. But, most importantly, I need you to continue being the exceptional warrior you've already proven yourself to be. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with President Williams asking about her training, her challenges, and her goals beyond graduation. He demonstrated a knowledge of her progress that was both impressive and slightly intimidating, mentioning specific exercises and performance metrics that showed he was receiving detailed briefings about her training. Before I let you go, the President said, I want to share something with you. I have a daughter who's 14 years old. She's been following your story in the news, and she asked me to tell you something if I ever had the chance to speak with you. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. What did she want you to tell me, sir? She said to tell you that you're proving that girls can be anything they want to be, and that she's proud to be an American because of people like you. The words hit Sarah harder than any compliment from instructors or praise from fellow candidates. Somehow, knowing that a young girl was inspired by her journey made all the pain, exhaustion, and doubt feel worthwhile. Sir, please tell your daughter that she can be anything she wants to be, and that the most important thing is to never give up on her dreams, no matter what other people say. I will, Petty Officer Martinez. And I want you to know that when you graduate from BUD/S, I hope you'll consider coming to Washington for a ceremony at the White House. It would be an honor to present you with the trident personally. The call ended with Sarah standing in stunned silence, still holding the phone and trying to process what had just happened. President Williams had not only called her personally, but had invited her to the White House for her graduation ceremony. It was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Captain Harrison was the first to speak. Well, Martinez, I think it's safe to say that your training has attracted some high-level attention. Master Chief Stone stepped forward with an expression Sarah had never seen before. It took her a moment to realize it was pride. Martinez, in 25 years of training special operations personnel, I have never seen a candidate receive a personal phone call from the president. That tells me everything I need to know about your performance and your potential. The remaining weeks of training passed in a blur of final exercises, evaluations, and preparations for graduation. Sarah's performance remained strong, but she found herself dealing with a new kind of pressure that had nothing to do with physical challenges or tactical problems. The media attention had exploded after news of the president's phone call leaked to the press. Reporters camped outside the base, trying to interview anyone who had contact with Sarah. Political commentators debated the implications of her training on television shows. Military officials found themselves fielding questions about special operations policies from congressional committees and international allies. Sarah tried to maintain focus on her training, but it was impossible to ignore the circus that had developed around her story. She began to understand that her graduation would be about much more than personal achievement. It would be a political statement that would affect military policy for years to come. The final week of training brought the last major evaluation, a comprehensive exercise that would test every skill the candidates had learned over the previous months. Teams would be inserted into a hostile environment, conduct multiple complex missions, and extract successfully while being hunted by skilled opposition forces. Sarah was assigned as team leader for the exercise, a responsibility that both thrilled and terrified her. Leading other SEAL candidates in a high-stakes evaluation was the ultimate test of everything she had learned about tactics, leadership, and decision-making under pressure. Her team consisted of Walsh, Rodriguez, and 2 other candidates who had survived the entire training cycle. The bonds formed between these men had grown stronger than any civilian friendships Sarah had ever experienced. They had suffered together, supported each other through impossible challenges, and earned each other's respect through shared hardship. All right, Martinez, Rodriguez said as they prepared for insertion, show us what a future SEAL leader looks like. The comment meant everything to Sarah, representing the complete transformation of their relationship from skeptical opposition to genuine respect and support. The final exercise was a masterpiece of tactical planning and execution. Sarah's team successfully completed 4 separate missions over a 72-hour period, evading enemy forces and achieving all objectives while maintaining communication discipline and operational security. Her leadership during the exercise was flawless, demonstrating the kind of calm decision-making under pressure that separated true warriors from ordinary soldiers. She adapted to changing circumstances, made difficult choices with limited information, and brought her entire team home safely. When the exercise concluded and final evaluations were complete, Sarah knew she had done everything possible to earn her place among the SEALs. Her individual performance rankings were in the top 15% of her class, and her leadership scores were among the highest recorded in recent years. The graduation ceremony was unlike anything in SEAL history. President Williams kept his promise, traveling to Coronado personally to present the tridents to the graduating class. Media coverage was unprecedented, with news crews from around the world documenting the historic moment when Sarah Martinez became the first woman to earn the Navy SEAL Trident. Standing at attention in her dress uniform, Sarah felt the weight of every challenge she had overcome, every person who had doubted her, and every young woman who would benefit from the doors she had opened. When President Williams placed the trident on her uniform, she thought about her father, who had flown out from Texas to witness the ceremony despite his earlier doubts. "Congratulations, SEAL Martinez," the president said quietly, loud enough only for her to hear. "You've changed history today." The ceremony was followed by a reception where Sarah was introduced to congressional leaders, military officials, and representatives from allied nations who wanted to discuss their own inclusion policies. It was overwhelming and humbling to realize that her individual journey had become a catalyst for change across the entire special operations community. But the most meaningful moment came when her father approached her after the official events were complete. Captain Roberto Martinez stood before his daughter with tears in his eyes, wearing his own dress uniform, and looking at her with an expression of amazement and pride. "Mija," he said, struggling to find words. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything." Sarah embraced her father, feeling years of doubt and disappointment dissolve in that moment. "You weren't wrong, Papa. You were protecting me the only way you knew how." "No," he said firmly. "I was limiting you because I couldn't imagine what you were capable of. You're stronger than any Marine I've ever known, including myself." As the sun set over Coronado Beach, Sarah Martinez stood with her fellow SEALs, wearing the trident she had fought so hard to earn. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a small apartment in Norfolk to a phone call with the president to this moment of ultimate achievement. The girl who had once been called too small, too soft, too worthless for military service had become something that had never existed before, a female Navy SEAL. In doing so, she had proven that some barriers exist only in our minds, and that with enough determination, even the most impossible dreams can become reality. But, perhaps most importantly, she had shown a generation of young women that they could be anything they dared to dream of becoming, as long as they were willing to fight for it. Later that night, as Sarah sat on the beach where she had endured so much pain and discovered so much strength, she received a text message from an unknown number. It was from President Williams' daughter. "Thank you for showing me that girls can be warriors too. I'm going to be a SEAL someday, just like you." Reading those words, Sarah Martinez smiled and realized that her journey was just beginning. She had not only earned her place among the warriors, she had opened a path for all the warriors who would follow. The waves continued to crash against the shore, carrying with them the echo of every challenge overcome and every dream achieved through the simple refusal to accept the word impossible. And somewhere in America, young girls were falling asleep with new dreams, knowing that the barriers of yesterday were gone forever.